Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Next Man Up Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Bannon Crowley. I'm here with my co-host, Colin Martin.
How's it going?
We've been a few weeks away. We haven't had that much to talk about since the end of the NBA season. The NFL offseason has been interesting. There's been a few signings that we'll talk about today and some speculation that we have going into the season. But most NFL off seasons at this point is basically just people talking about contracts and if players are going to get signed or not, which we'll talk about later. Some wide receivers that we can talk about and kind of some more predictions that we have for the season and talk about players in general. But with the NBA done and the NFL kind of in a slump right now, we don't have that much to talk about. We'll try to put a few things out today. We have an Instagram post that went out the other day as we record this, so we'll talk about that, and we'll just talk about basically everything that we can talk about right now in the NFL. Starting off with probably the biggest news: DeAndre Hopkins, who's been a free agent for a while now, finally signed to a team, and he ended up signing with the Titans for a 2-year deal with over $26 million with incentives and everything. So basically $13 million a year is how it's going to break down. I know you're a big DeAndre Hopkins fan, so I want you to tell us how you feel about this overall.
Well, yeah, I mean, clearly it helps the Titans quite a bit. I still think Hopkins is a top 10 receiver in the NFL, and there's no doubt that a guy like that is going to be a huge asset for whatever young QB they roll with, whether it is Malik Willis or Will Levis, or, if they end up attacking another young quarterback in the second round next year, whoever it may be, having a guy like Hopkins for this year and next year, it's going to be, a big acquisition. And if it works out well, then he could be a guy that sticks with the team, longer than this 2-year contract. I don't see Hopkins as the type of guy that would leave if things go well. I guess he's kind of been forced out of bad situations in his career so far. But, as a fan of Hopkins, as you mentioned, I was a little disappointed to see him go there, not just because the Patriots were floating around, but just because I want to see his career progress to that next level. And what that means for him would be going out and winning a ring. And realistically, I don't think that happens in the 2-year time frame with Tennessee. So although it's nice for the Titans, I think it's a little bit of an underrated move. I think Hopkins is going to find a lot of open space in the field with such a solid running game that Tennessee has right now. But at the end of the day, the Titans were the team that wanted him the most. It seems like they're the team that was willing to give up the most money for him. So you got to respect the decision. I'm excited. I'm glad he's not going to be like Odell Beckham, who hangs around free agency for a whole year. Glad he found out that future team this offseason. So it's exciting. How do you feel about it?
Well, speaking of Odell, now we know that Odell will be making more than him this season. So the Titans get a little bit of a steal with this. They do have a good running game, like you said, with Derrick Henry. The quarterback situation is very up in the air. You have Malik Willis, Will Levis. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with Ryan Tannehill. We don't really know what's going on over there. And in the wide receiver position, I mean, you have Treylon Burks. I'm a fan of him. But besides that, it's going to be pretty wide open for DeAndre Hopkins up to this point. Looking at the rest of this depth chart, it's not that great. So they might have the 1-2 combo with Derrick Henry and DeAndre Hopkins, but you don't really know what's going to happen, who's going to be throwing you the ball. And this team overall is still solid. They have a good defense. They have a good coach, but I don't really see them being too much of a contender. And adding one wide receiver to a team that was good to okay isn't really going to put them over that next level. I think it may help them win a game or two more, but with the AFC being already so stacked, I don't really see that doing too much for the Titans overall, but that will help DeAndre Hopkins overall. He will get a lot of touches, which will help his stats and everything he needs to. And he could make up to $15 million with the incentives, which with his incentives on this contract, I think with him being there, he will definitely be able to hit that.
Yeah, what I will say though is that I agree this Titans team isn't, they're not going to be contending for a ring or anything like that. But the AFC South is still pretty weak. I know we both like the Jaguars. I know they were very impressive last year, but who's to say that Jaguars team is a solidified number one team in the AFC South? There's always a chance they could take that step back. And obviously with the Texans and the Colts, those teams aren't really close yet. So if Tennessee can will themselves to even like 9 wins, 10 wins would be really good with a really solid defense and a really smart defensive minded coach like Vrabel. If Hopkins is the guy that gives them an extra win or two, that extra win or two, assuming things go wrong in Jacksonville, gets you a playoff spot. So I agree. I don't think this is going to be the move that, gets Tannehill a ring or anything, but I think getting a piece like Hopkins is actually very helpful. I think out of all the teams going after him, they were the ones that maybe needed him the most. And I think that's why they were willing to give him that sort of money.
Yeah, and I think we'll see a good year out of DeAndre Hopkins once they figure out the quarterback situation, which we'll probably see coming in the next few weeks. But speaking about quarterbacks, we did post the other day our top 10 quarterbacks going into this next season. So we'll just start off with number one, Patrick Mahomes. I don't think that's really a hot take anywhere else you look. If someone says that he's not the best quarterback in the NFL, they're just trying to be different at this point. I mean, he is the best guy in the NFL. I don't think there's really any way to debate it. He's coming off of another Super Bowl ring, and he could be an all-time great based on this trajectory. But after that, we have number two, which is kind of up in the air.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta agree with you on Mahomes. That's easy. He's gonna be a perennial MVP candidate every year until he falls off a cliff. But when we go to number two, I think the big names that come up are Burrow and Allen. And I see an argument for either way. I think Burrow's obviously younger. He has I would say more accuracy than Allen. I know that's debatable, but obviously accuracy is something that Allen struggled with early in his career, and we still see it sometimes. But Allen has that freak arm and, maybe more outside of the pocket athleticism. So, on our list, we put Burrow at number two, but I think there's a pretty strong argument for people that would put Allen in that spot as well.
Yeah, I mean, between those two guys, depending on who you ask, I would say between these top three, I mean, not to spoil it or anything, but Josh Allen is number three, as we just mentioned. These are really the top three guys in the NFL right now. I think, as we'll talk about, there's some other guys after this who are either young or they've had injuries, but I think these three guys have definitely solidified themselves as the top three guys right now. Just between the AFC championships that these three have been to competing in the past few years, I think Mahomes obviously has got the best of all these guys. Though Joe Burrow did make the Super Bowl, they were close to winning it almost. I do think that Bengals team will be able to compete too for the next few years. The Bills team, I still think is really good, but we've seen them struggle tremendously in the playoffs. They make it there. They just haven't been able to get over that hump of the Chiefs. But I do think we could end up seeing Josh Allen or even Joe Burrow make another Super Bowl within the next few years, just because the Chiefs will be good. But as we've seen every year, the team kind of gets worse, but they still end up being good just because Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce are hard to beat. But the defense has got very good the past few years. That was a struggle for them for a while, but the better that gets, kind of the less they can put into the offense, because that wide receiver depth chart right now isn't very good. But when you have a guy that can do everything you need, it definitely helps you out a lot.
Oh, 100%. And I think at this next spot, this is where a lot of, people on the internet would pencil in Jalen Hurts. And I do want to talk about him a little bit. We'll talk about his placement a little later. But, I think Jalen Hurts does a lot of things really well. He struggled early in his career. Some people wrote him off, but he had an incredible last season. He led the Eagles all the way to the Super Bowl. If it weren't for injury, there was definitely a debate for him to win the MVP. He missed a couple of games towards the end of the season. But I mean, wow, his athleticism has transcended to a next level. I think we saw that in college, but like a lot of athletic QBs in college, you never know how it's going to work at the next level. So they need to show off the arm talent. And that's what I was most impressed with him. His rookie year, he was flustered. He wasn't stable in the pocket. And last year we saw a new composed Jalen Hurts. And that's what took the Eagles to, being a touchdown away from winning the Super Bowl. So I want to give him credit. But with that being said, we have some guys over him at this spot.
Yeah, number four, we have Lamar Jackson, who was an MVP a few years ago. I know a lot of people have forgotten about that up to this point. He hasn't played in the playoffs in almost 3 years up to this point. He's just been hurt, and they've had injuries. Last year, they almost won the game too in the first round, even though they did have a Pro Bowl quarterback last year. It just didn't help them too much, as the Pro Bowl doesn't really mean anything anymore. And it's basically just a Madden game to this point. But Lamar Jackson, still one of the best NFL quarterbacks right now. We do have that top three pretty solidified. But outside of that, these guys aren't bad. Obviously, this might be the second tier, but it's very close to that top tier. And a guy like Lamar Jackson, if he comes back completely healthy, can definitely put himself back in that position.
Yeah, and I think me and you both agree. Any of these guys in the second tier could make that jump into the first tier very easily. They all have the potential. And talking about Lamar, he's a guy, we've talked about Hopkins already. Now we're talking about Lamar. They're some of my favorite players in the league. So obviously I have good things to say. I understand why people might find number 4 a little bit of a stretch because we haven't seen a lot of Lamar Jackson recently. But as you mentioned, when he's on the field, he's electric. He's an MVP caliber player. And I don't think our list would be, unique unless we shined a little bit on that. Because if we see a healthy Lamar this season, we could argue that he might be number 1, assuming Mahomes has a down year or something like that. We both know Lamar has the talent, but kicking it to number 5, we have your guy, Justin Herbert. I mean, I know people want to see Hurts here, but Justin Herbert has looked amazing since, the day he got into the league. He's, is a tall guy. He's, has so many strengths, and that Chargers team is built really well around him. I'm really excited to look at next year. I know the Chargers are one of those teams that everyone has as, their sleeper contender every year, and they always fall a little bit short. But adding Quentin Johnston, one of my favorite college wide receivers last year, it gets, Justin Herbert another tall, athletic weapon at the wide receiver position. And we've seen it with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. He thrives with those guys. So I think putting him at 5 is not a hot take. I think he has immense talent, and I think we both know the Chargers will succeed with him next year.
Yeah, and overall, these guys in that second tier, like we were talking about, Lamar Jackson and Justin Herbert to this point, they're both guys that can make that next step. Lamar has just been hurt. That's kind of why he's down a little bit. And I think Justin Fields, by the end of the season, can make his way into that top tier of quarterback just because he has so much that going for him. I mean, he has been able to throw the ball for almost 5,000 yards last year. Going into this season, too, he has Mike Williams, like you just said, Quentin Johnston there, Keenan Allen, and even Joshua Palmer had a good season last year when there was injuries too. But those top 3 guys, I mean, pretty similar overall built receivers, and that works for a guy who can throw the ball. One of the best throwers in the league right now. I mean, he has a tremendous arm. And like you said, he's been great since he stepped into the league, but it might just take another season with this year. If he can keep going, I think he can put his way into that that top tier of quarterbacks.
Yeah, and then at number 6 is where we put Jalen Hurts. I said a lot about him already, so Banning, if you want to say some more about Hurts, I mean.
Yeah, I think, like I said, basically the same thing with Justin Herbert. I'm getting the 2 mixed up now.
You got it.
They're both guys that are young guys, and Jalen Hurts last year had a good year, but I still think he needs another year to get into that top tier of quarterbacks, because we've seen guys have very good seasons and then kind of fall off a little bit after, not necessarily get bad, but even if he plays to the same level he played last year, or even a little better, he can get up to that top tier. We just have to see more out of him. Like you said, that rookie year, he just seemed flustered. That whole offense was kind of on and off. There were some games he looked really good, and then there were some games he just couldn't throw the ball at all. But now with this offense and how good they were last year, I know they did lose a few pieces, but in the draft, they had one of the best drafts, if not the best draft. And overall, the defense will get better, which helps the offense too. We've seen this happen before with teams, especially the Chiefs that we mentioned before. The Chiefs offense has always been good, but the reason why they couldn't get over that hump, especially against the Patriots too, the defense just wasn't there. And when the defense can keep the offense on the field, and you have an offense that is so electric, if they go out there and score every time they're on the field, but they don't need to be on the field, then that helps you even more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just based on last year, we know Hurts was that top level guy, but I agree with you. I think we need to see another season from it. But a guy we've seen a lot of MVP caliber seasons from is Aaron Rodgers, and we put him in at number 7. I know some people might call it too low. Some people might call it too high. Obviously, he has a brand new system in New York. He's leaving Green Bay for the first time in his career. It's going to be, maybe a bit of a culture shock to see him play for the Jets, but there's no denying that he's one of the best QBs in the league year in and year out. So even though this list predicts a little bit of a fall off, it's not to say that he cannot be that high level guy. I mean, he just has this incredible feel for the game, and it really doesn't even matter who he has on his squad. He's going to lead them far. And I think that's why Jets fans have pretty high expectations going into next year, because they know they're getting a quarterback that knows how to win. Maybe not in the second round of the playoffs, but a guy that knows how to get teams there.
Yeah, and this Jets team overall, they've been building up the past few years. They officially committed to the rebuild. They drafted Zach Wilson, didn't really go great for them overall, but they kept getting young pieces too, and they were committed to rebuilding. And then they had an opportunity that kind of fell into their lap, getting Aaron Rodgers, and it fit their timeline overall because they might be giving up pieces in the future. But if you're getting Aaron Rodgers of the past few years, even if he's a little step down, he's still a top 7 quarterback like we rated him. He won 2 MVPs the past few years. And he's going into this offense with some very interesting wide receivers. Mecole Hardman, obviously he brought Randall Cobb with him. I don't really expect too much out of him, but because you have Corey Davis, you have Garrett Wilson, and you have Allen Lazard. So he brought a few of his guys with him too, but you're mixing in guys like Mecole Hardman, who is a fantastic deep threat overall, and Garrett Wilson, fantastic year last year. And you finally get Breece Hall, hopefully completely healthy this year, and Michael Carter, a good backup running back. I think even if he takes a little step back, you still get Aaron Rodgers passing. If he throws for over 4,000 yards this season, he has a great group of guys that can do different things. And for a guy who's kind of older to this point, if you have guys that can do different things, it helps you a lot. I don't really expect him to take too much of a step back, but we put him at 7 with a lot of guys who are younger above him, just because we're kind of expecting them to take a little bit of a jump. But Aaron Rodgers is still one of the best in the game to this point.
Yeah, 100% agree with that completely. But a guy that we have following up on him has a much different story. At number 8, we put Trevor Lawrence. As you guys know, number 1 overall pick a couple years ago. He's going into his 3rd year now, and he took that step up last year. First year, he had probably the worst NFL coach of all time. Not a lot of pieces around him, so we expect to see him struggle. But second year, he gets a new system. He gets some, better developed guys. And man, he looked great last year. So I think it's fair to say that we expect another big year out of him. I see an argument to put him higher. I even see an argument to put him lower. He's a guy like Jalen Hurts who hasn't fully proved himself yet. But Trevor Lawrence checks all the boxes you want in a future franchise quarterback. So we wouldn't be surprised to see him, in that top 3 range. But 8 is pretty safe after, especially a guy like Rodgers, who's more than solidified himself in the league at number 7.
Yeah. And a guy like this is a guy that we could definitely see a lot higher by the end of the season, even halfway through the season. I think he will have a great season overall. And even after his first season, I know a lot of people were coming at him for everything that was going on, but he did have probably the worst coach in NFL history. I know there are people talking specifically on the Nosebleeds podcast, their prediction saying that he was going to be a bust, and it looked like it was right for the first year. Comes back in the second year and just proves that he was one of the best generational talents that we've seen in a while. And they're getting back Calvin Ridley. I think that's something that's kind of gone under the radar a little bit for people. But Calvin Ridley, he was a top 15, even breaking top 10 wide receiver when he was playing, and now he's taking a year off. He's going in here and he's going to have a great season too. You have guys like Zay Jones too, Christian Kirk. And then the running back position too. You still have Travis Etienne, who's a good running back, but he can also catch the ball. We've seen him just be a great player overall, and he already has the connection with Trevor Lawrence and Tank Bigsby too. I think that's going to help them a lot because you're going to be able to run those 2 running back sets with Tank Bigsby kind of being that tank running back, I guess, overall. And then you have Travis Etienne in the backfield. I think by the end of this season, I wouldn't be surprised with the guys on this list if we even see Trevor Lawrence kind of pushing that top 5 quarterback. And within the next few years, I think he could definitely be an MVP candidate. As long as this Jaguars team just keeps building and doing what they're doing, this will be a great team.
Absolutely. And at number 9, we have kind of a controversial name. We have Jared Goff. I know when he came into the league, people thought he was great. And in the last couple of years, he's had struggling seasons. Obviously the Rams moved on from him a couple of years ago. And, things have not been in his favor as of late. But last year, I think he might have had one of the most underrated seasons in the league. Obviously, the Lions were a sleeper team that were this close to making the playoffs, but I think we can anticipate another great season from Jared Goff. And I don't think great is a stretch. He went the whole second half of the season with only throwing 1 interception. It might have been 0 interceptions. And that's how you close out a year strong, especially on a Lions team that has a lot of fight. Dan Campbell instilled, this mentality into them, and they come out firing. Speaking of a guy with a dynamic running back core, I love the add of David Montgomery mixed with Jahmyr Gibbs. Jahmyr Gibbs is in that ETN role while David Montgomery is, probably a better version of a guy like Tank Bigsby. So I really like the pairing there. Amon-Ra St. Brown, despite, making a name for himself last year, still might be one of the most underrated wide receivers in the whole NFL. Obviously, losing out on some of those guys because of the whole gambling thing is going to make it tough for him. But with an amazingly well built offensive line and all the pieces around him to succeed, I don't think Jared Goff is going to fall off. I think this is a system where he'll continue to thrive in.
Yeah, and like you said, one of the most underrated seasons last year, 4,400 yards, 27 touchdowns, and only 7 interceptions. And that second half just playing amazing. It definitely helps him. And he had a case for being a top 10 quarterback. And a lot of people may not see that. But I mean, we have him in the top 10 for a reason. And going into next season, like you said, they did lose some of their pieces, but they did sign Marvin Jones Jr. I think that's a great addition for them. Josh Reynolds, too, is going to come over here, and that's going to help them. Besides that, the wide receivers, it's going to be interesting. They don't have the greatest depth outside of that, but like you said, they do have some good running backs. And I think they'll have a guy that will kind of come out as that good 4th or 5th wide receiver just because the way this offense is built. But this team overall is built very well defensively, and that's kind of where the coach is going at this point. I mean, one of the most, I guess, rough overall coaches, and Dan Campbell, I mean, he's a fan favorite for a reason. He's going to go out there, and this team may not be the most flashy overall, but it's Detroit. Like we've seen with the Pistons, like we've seen with the Lions, they're a grinded out team. And I think this running game is going to be good, but I do think Jared Goff will he may take a little role this year where he may not throw as many yards as he did last year, but if he can get everything done that he needs to do, that's a great position for a quarterback.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with being, a game manager. I think that term is thrown around very loosely to, make fun of guys' abilities. But with a team like Detroit, I think piece it together perfectly. They're a team that grinds it out. They don't need, a guy like Mahomes who's going to, go crazy and make these ridiculous plays. I'm sure they'd love to have him, but sometimes you just need a guy that can handle the offense, be calm and collected. And Jared Goff has changed his career path of being called, kind of like this useless bust sort of guy to being a guy that's really solid and trustworthy. And I feel that way about him. And then, at number 10, we had a big decision to make because number 10 gets tough. I think 3 of the names that we were throwing around the most were Dak Prescott, Daniel Jones, and Kirk Cousins. I think all these guys do similar things. Obviously, they're in different positions, but I mean, Banning, if you want to give our thought process for who we picked at number 10, I think they'd like to hear it.
Yeah, I think Kirk Cousins overall, pretty similar, I would say, to a guy like Jared Goff. They both do what they need to do, and they both had great seasons the past few years. And that Minnesota team was very good last year. They ended up losing in the playoffs in the first round, but they were still good overall. They had a great record, and they were the 2 seed going into the playoffs for a reason. With Justin Jefferson, obviously that helps them out a lot, but they did still have Adam Thielen, though they won't have him next season. They'll still have some good wide receivers over there, and Kirk Cousins knows what he needs to do. But this 10th spot overall, like you said, we had a few guys that we were going between. Dak Prescott last year with all those interceptions, kind of a reason why we put him down a little bit. And Daniel Jones, I would say with his season last year, if we're going to keep the sentiment of guys kind of have to have back-to-back years of being good, I think Daniel Jones could definitely sneak into that top 10. Another name kind of thrown around too is Matthew Stafford, but he was hurt last year. He's getting older too. I wouldn't be surprised. And kind of 2 other guys that we talked about too, Deshaun Watson. He was a top 5 quarterback when he played last year. Wasn't great overall after the suspension and everything, but I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up in the top 10 by the end of the year. And Geno Smith too, a guy who's very similar in the regards to Daniel Jones, having a really good year last year. We kind of just have to see it happen again. So this 10th spot overall, I mean, all the other guys I think definitely deserve their spot. And I'm not saying Kirk Cousins doesn't deserve it, but I think by the end of the year, I wouldn't be surprised if we see some movement from that 7 to 10 range overall. And even within the top 6 or 7 overall, I think we will definitely see some movement. Trevor Lawrence at 8, I wouldn't be surprised if he moves up overall. And a guy like Aaron Rodgers, I think he'll have a good year. But even Jalen Hurts too, and Justin Herbert at 5 and 6, they could definitely move up. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some younger quarterbacks, maybe even some older guys like Matthew Stafford. If they have a really good year again, they could come in and take this 10th spot.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also have to consider injuries. I think there's a lot of guys that are very hyped up going into next season. That, I want to talk about Justin Fields too. I think because of especially fantasy impact and, a young Bears team that's pretty exciting. A lot of people are talking about him. But as much as I like him and I'm a fan of him, he hasn't even hit that first step of proving it the first year yet. So I don't think we could put him in there based on a projection. And I'm also a big fan of Tua Tagovailoa, but with the injuries, I know we talked about Lamar Jackson and put him high, but I think Tua's injury is a little bit different. I'm worried about his future playing football. Obviously, hoping everything's okay, but don't think you can put him on a top 10 list because of that. But I mean, we just spoke our piece on a lot of quarterbacks. But the big news in the NFL right now, especially if you're on the Twitter side, is about the running backs in the NFL, specifically the star-studded running backs. Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs are two guys that are on the franchise tag that were looking for long-term deals that just didn't get them. And that sparked a lot of debate in the NFL community, especially, with these star running backs about what the value of the running back in the NFL has become. Obviously, back in the 80s, the 90s, you needed a good running back to succeed in the NFL. But we've seen within the last 10, 20 years that that's just not the case anymore. Teams are winning Super Bowls without star running backs, these Chiefs teams, those Patriots teams. And it's kind of becoming a different story in the NFL. So with that being said, I want to know what you make of this whole running back dilemma and what you think the future of the position is looking like.
Yeah, so overall, I'll just talk mostly about Saquon. As a Giants fan, I want to kind of address the situation. And by the time this video comes out on Thursday, I will have a video kind of overall talking about why all this is going on with the running backs. So look forward to that this weekend. But right now, I'll specifically just talk about Saquon overall. And I think the Giants are kind of going into this season hoping, giving Daniel Jones all that money, that he can transcend into kind of that next tier of quarterback. And like we were just talking about with the other quarterbacks, he could make a leap into that top 10 area, that 9 or 10 spot, if he has another good year. And I think what they're trying to do with Saquon, I think he will probably re-sign with the Giants next year in the offseason. If he doesn't throughout the season too, I'm not really sure exactly when he's going to play, but I don't think this is any shade towards him specifically as a player. But when you're looking at it, it's a business in the NFL, and there's so many teams that have succeeded recently without needing a top tier running back. Just looking at these teams, we saw Tampa Bay go. They had Leonard Fournette that they signed on a 1-year contract. They kept bringing him back too when Tom Brady was there, but it was based on that passing and the defense overall. I mean, we've seen the Chiefs. It seems like they've just put a bunch of different guys in too. They got Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the first round, but he didn't really pan out as they wanted him to with a first round pick. And then they get Isaiah Pacheco last year, who a very underrated running back, but 7th round pick overall. He did exactly what he needed to do. And they brought in some veteran guys too. The NFL right now is just a passing league overall. And as a Giants fan, I do hope Saquon gets that new contract that he wants. I know they were only $1 or $2 million off, but it seems like they weren't really committed to giving him that extra money. I do think if he does go into this season and plays and has a good season, it's going to be really hard not to re-sign him. But it's a very interesting spot right now to be a running back. And like I said before, I'll have a video later this week about my thoughts and overall and kind of why this is happening. But I do want to hear your thoughts overall.
Yeah, and it's tough for me because at the end of the day, we talk about football a lot, and as you mentioned, we know it's a business. If you see all these teams succeed without a star level running back, it seems like a bad strategy to go and pay one upwards of, however much these top tier guys are making and, throw some money down the drain that you could be addressing in more important positions for your team. I really do understand that, but I guess I just wish that wasn't the case. But when you look at these top tier running backs that are talking about, not getting this money, pretty much every single one of them has an injury history. There's not really a running back that's been around in the NFL for a long time that doesn't have a history of injuries. I mean, you think of these top guys off the top of your head. Christian McCaffrey, we know his issues. Derrick Henry was just injured last year. Saquon Barkley's had a history of it as well. So it's tough to give these guys long-term contracts and tie them up with a lot of money, knowing that more likely than not, they're going to be hurt. And you can't be paying dudes that you don't think are going to play for your team. It's a waste of money, and I hate to see it because I'm a big fan of all these running backs. I think there still is a role for them in the NFL. These top tier guys, I mean, we saw Christian McCaffrey almost bring the 49ers to the Super Bowl basically by himself last year. I mean, I like Brock Purdy, but he was just a placeholder for McCaffrey running the offense. So I think he deserves a lot of credit for that, but I don't know. I think it's just a sad situation. I do I'm happy to see these guys speaking on this. I think it's nice to hear from Derrick Henry, hear from McCaffrey, hear from Jonathan Taylor. about their feelings about it, stand up for their fellow running backs. But I don't know. I don't think it's a good investment, and it makes me sad. I think a guy like Saquon's gonna have another good year. I agree. I think the Giants are gonna sign him again, but it's tough. It's a sad situation, but it's just kind of what the position has become. And I think in the future, as the NFL develops, the running back will gain its value back. But I think we're in a little bit of a spot where it's going to be tough to argue for that.
Yeah, I think as we see the NFL, and I mean, the NFL is kind of catching up to college at this point because college football was just so based on the passing game. And now there's a lot of that coming into the NFL. College football is going back to having a lot of great running backs, especially that we've seen within the Big Ten and the SEC. So in a few years, we might go back to seeing that, especially with how quarterbacks are being paid. There's going to be some teams that don't want to go out there and pay $50 million for a quarterback. So we might see a shift coming soon. And there's a lot of great running backs too that we're seeing come through. Like this year in the draft overall, I mean, we saw Bijan Robinson, and we'll see how he does on the Falcons. They don't really have a great quarterback right now, to put it lightly. But overall, if he does really well, we could see them kind of be the first team in a while that could really build around a running back. We did see the Titans do that too with Derrick Henry, but this could kind of be the next wave of teams that are going to go in and kind of build around that. Another team like the Lions too, they just got Jahmyr Gibbs, and they have a solid quarterback right now that we've seen with some good wide receivers, but we could be starting to see a shift. But this is the big start right here. If these running backs don't get paid, obviously teams are going to look at that. Like we said, it's a business overall. But with that being said, hopefully you guys watch the video that comes out later this week. I'll talk more about my thoughts overall with that. But one final thing that we want to talk about too, some Madden ratings have come out. We don't have all of them up to this point, but we do have 2 players kind of in the 99 club. And seeing that, we kind of want to talk about our players that we would have in the 99 overall club. Just to put this out right now, Aaron Donald and Justin Jefferson are the only 2 right now. We haven't got the quarterback rankings, but I think we could assume that Patrick Mahomes would be in there. I don't know how they would put Josh Allen in there. I wouldn't be surprised if they do, just because he's on the cover, but I guess that's an interesting debate overall. So I want to hear, who do you think would be in your 99 club?
Yeah, and it's kind of tough. I might be missing an obvious guy, so feel free to yell at me if I'm wrong here. But I had 5 guys on my list. I had Aaron Donald, of course, Patrick Mahomes, of course. Then a guy that got a 98 or 97, I believe, Myles Garrett. I know that that's kind of one that he's been on the edge of it before, but you can't just see his value by looking at the stats. He's probably, outside of Aaron Donald, the most highly, I guess countered upon defender in the last couple of years. Teams will throw out double teams on him the second the game starts. I think he's a true disruptor on defense, and he's just an incredible edge talent. I know people like Bosa more, people like TJ Watt more, but I'm really a fan of Myles Garrett. I think he checks all the boxes of a 99 overall. And I know that might sound crazy to say, but he's a guy that I had to include on my list. Next up, I have Micah Parsons, and this might be more of a Madden thing, but he is so versatile. The fact that he is probably a top 5 player as a linebacker or defensive end in the NFL, even depending on the scheme. I think that alone can put him into the 99 club. I think he is a great coverage player in man. I think he's obviously a disruptor in zone. So I also would put him as a 99. Then as my 5th guy, I have Travis Kelce. I think he's just the best tight end in football. He has an argument to be one of the best tight ends of all time, and I don't think he's taken a step back by any means. He really is just a wide receiver in an offensive lineman's body. So he's, just one of those incredible guys that I think deserves a 99 overall rating. I'm obviously missing Justin Jefferson from my list, who got it in real life. But what I will say about him is that despite me feeling like he is the best wide receiver in the league by far, I really don't know if we're in a spot right now where we have a true 99 receiver in the NFL right now. I think of guys that, all time that deserve these 99s. I think of a guy like, prime Calvin Johnson. He was just absolutely dominating. Jerry Rice, of course, even Randy Moss. These guys were game disruptors that were some of the most dominating people in the league. And although I think Justin Jefferson is a tier 1 wide receiver and easily the best in the league, I could see, teams scheming around him and potentially him not being that disruptor at the same level as those guys are. So I know that might be a hot take. I'd still put him at like a 98 or something, but I really just want to throw that opinion out there as well.
Yeah, and a lot of my guys obviously will be similar to yours just because These are the best players in the league. And I want to start obviously with Patrick Mahomes as a 99. That's kind of an easy one. I do agree with Myles Garrett. I still think that he is probably the best in his position up to this point. A guy that I would leave off, like you said, is Justin Jefferson. I know that might be a hot take. I know there's a lot of people who think he might even be the best player in the NFL. I've seen people say that. And I think a little bit disrespectful that they put him at a 99 and then they put Jamar Chase at a 94. I personally think they're very close. And I know that might be a hot take overall. They do have Tyreek Hill as a 98. I think that's fair too, to keep him and kind of Justin Jefferson and Devontae Adams in that same area. And Cooper Kupp at a 96 too. But like I said, I think you got to have Aaron Donald at this point. He is one of the best players that we've seen in the game, period. I mean, he has just been the definition of consistency in one of the toughest spots to play, and he's double teamed on pretty much every snap. So you have him, Patrick Mahomes, I would say Myles Garrett too, Travis Kelce, completely unguardable. I think Justin Jefferson and Travis Kelce, it's interesting to look at. I do think Travis Kelce, though, they are different positions, but Travis Kelce is basically a wide receiver at this point, and he is completely unguardable no matter what you do. I think Justin Jefferson could work his way up. I do think he's a 99, but I do think Travis Kelce's there. And I would say the last guy that I have is Trent Williams. I think he's the best tackle in the league right now. And I think the NFL and kind of Madden overall, they do sometimes show love to those players, but a guy who last year, I mean, was another All-Pro, another Pro Bowl selection. He's just been solid for his whole career, and he is getting a little older, but he's not taking a step back at all. Only 1 sack allowed all of last year. He's just been fantastic, and I think he is the best tackle in the NFL, so I would put him up there. But there's a lot of guys that are close to that could definitely make their way up by the end of the season. Justin Jefferson, Micah Parsons, even Nick Bosa, to name some. TJ Watt was a little low on this list. I think they gave him a 93 or 94, which is interesting too. I think he should definitely at least be a 96. He's been contending for Defensive Player of the Year with Nick Bosa and Myles Garrett. It's been a 3-horse race the past few years. So I think he should be higher, but we'll see what happens with the quarterbacks. I would personally put Josh Allen and Joe Burrow probably both at that 98 or 97 area. But if they do put one in there, I wouldn't be surprised. I personally wouldn't agree with it. I do think if you're going to have 99s, you have to think of guys either offensively who are completely unguardable or defensively guys that are unguardable too.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's a video game that's not always amazing. So they're going to do some stuff for the clicks. At the end of the day, they just want us to play the game. So it's not that deep, but it is always fun to talk about. I mean, we've been playing Madden since we were little kids. So it's always going to be an interesting part of football discussions. But, end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Just some fun to talk about.
Yeah. And I think overall too, the thing that people don't really look at is they're not picking the player and picking the overall. They put the stats in, and then that kind of just translates to the overall, which makes sense. I mean, there's a lot of guys too where you think they're very good, but some of these guys have holes in their games. Like, I don't know if I could potentially put a guy like Tyreek Hill as a 99. I think a 98 is really good, but there's a little bit of hole in his game. I mean, obviously he's not the strongest guy overall too, and putting everything into it, that's what happens with these 99 overalls. But with these rankings coming out, we just wanted to talk about it, make it a little fun. But with that being said, I mean, we don't have that much left to talk about in the NFL. It's kind of been a little bit dry going into this, the start of all these camps too. And with a lot of players sitting out too, it's something to talk about, but we don't need to talk about all the players that are sitting out, mostly because it's all contract stuff, which we just talked about. But with all these videos coming out, hopefully we can continue to do the podcast each week. As long as we have stuff to talk about, we don't want to come on here and talk for 45 minutes about stuff that doesn't matter. And that's kind of why we've skipped the podcast the past few weeks, just because we don't want to come on here and talk and you guys listen to us basically say nothing and say that a team's 7th string wide receiver got hurt in practice, because no one wants to hear that. So hopefully we can continue with stuff. And as the weeks progress too, we're coming into the part where the start of August, where we can start doing our preseason predictions for the NFL. So that'll be very interesting too. And that's always, every time we post that on the page, we always get people talking about that, because we may have differing opinions from other people. And I know we both have differing opinions about teams too, which makes it interesting to talk about. So with that being said, We'll see you guys in the next episode next week. And hopefully you guys watch the rest of the videos that come out this week. Thank you for the continued support on everything, and we'll see you then.
Peace out, guys.